All right, everyone. Well, if we got that feeling, then we're done. That's what it's all about. Today, today we're talking about don't overthink it, and obviously from the technical difficulties we had for me not thinking about how I set everything up this morning, I'm already there. I'm already there. Don't overthink it. Sometimes we get stuck in our heads. We get stuck and the intellect deludes us into its superiority over all other aspects of our being. But we want to remember that this thing that we call thought, even though we're not exactly certain what that is, even though we experience this thing that's called thought, and this activity that we call the activity of the intellect, that's not all we are. That is just an aspect of what we are. A very important aspect, a very powerful aspect. I mean, think of what we can do with the power of thought. Dr. Holmes tells us that we have girded the globe with commerce. We have ships that cross the ocean at speeds that 150 years ago, 200 years ago, people would not have believed possible. You can order something on the internet and it's here in a few days, coming from a foreign country. It's just absolutely amazing, just absolutely amazing. And the ability to think, and the ability to solve problems, and the ability of logic and reason and mathematics and all of those things have enabled humanity to do that. But even with the wonderful aspect that we call thinking or mind or consciousness or intellect, we are much more than that. And we can get stuck. We can get stuck believing in the supremacy of thought, in the supremacy of the intellect, that is all we are. Even if you ask people where they think, they point to their heads. We're stuck in our heads. So today we're going to talk about don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. Because thinking can take us a certain distance on our spiritual journey. But thinking will never take us all the way. There's a point of no mind. There's a point where we have to leave the activity that we are so familiar with if we are to truly experience all that we are. All that we are. Our Zoom group a few weeks ago, we were watching some interviews with Carl Jung, and he said, that the conscious self, he called the ego, I believe, cannot know the unconscious self, but the unconscious self is an important part of the total self. So I kind of look at that and say, yeah, you see, there's a place where the conscious mind can go. There's a place that is, but the conscious mind can't go. So a few years ago, I was doing a little bit of research on a history project, which I like to do. I like to learn the history of the places I live and write up short articles or do a short AV piece. And I discovered that there's a grave just maybe 10 miles straight down the road from where I live. There's an old cemetery. And there's a grave in there of a man who was in the 7th Cavalry, and he was Custer's engineering officer on the day that they rode into the Little Bighorn. He was at Custer's side. That was his position. That was his responsibility. And yet, through a strange twist of fate, he lived. He lived. And I got interested in that story, and I started to do some research. And in doing so, I came across different articles about Custer himself. And one article I was reading was kind of painting a portrait of a man who was very impatient, very impetuous. And the anecdote that they related is that wherever they were, he was traveling along. There was a general and a general's aide and a bunch of troops traveling along, and they came up to a river. And the general turned to his aide, and they got involved in this discussion about how deep the river might be, and how could they determine how deep the river was, and were they going to be able to successfully cross this river? Did they need to build a pontoon bridge, and all of these other things, these activities of thought, these activities of mind. And Custer just rode his horse out into the middle of the river. The river was about chest deep on the horse, and he turned around and he said, "General, this is how deep the river is. Don't overthink it. Don't overthink it." See, we can get stuck in our heads. So in the teachings that we get from the East, we are told, neti neti, neti neti, not this, not that. Our idea of God, whatever our idea of the divine happens to be, it is not that. It is not that. From Buddhism, we are told, if you meet the Buddha walking along the road, kill him. Kill him. Sounds a little bit harsh. But what they're telling us is that you haven't met the Buddha. You can't meet the Buddha walking along the road, you see. It's not something that we can do with the intellect. So if we have this intellectual idea, and we are grasping hold of this intellectual idea, and we are saying, "Oh, this is it, I have it, I understand it." Neti neti, not this, not that. What you have is a concept, and the concept is not the thing. It's very, very interesting to me. Last Monday. The Wednesday night group moved to Monday this week. Yeah, so the Zoom group has moved to Monday, and we were watching an episode of Meeting of Minds by Steve Allen, and they had the character Machiavelli was one of the historical people involved in the discussion, and I loved what he said, because I'm such a stickler for understanding definitions of how we're using words. And what he said, what the character portraying Machiavelli in character, what he said is, most arguments, disagreements amongst people cannot be solved because people don't even start with the same definition or the same understanding of what it is that they're arguing about. And if you just observe politics, if you just observe TV and what's going on, people are arguing past one another all the time, because they don't even agree on the very fundamental definition of what it is that they're trying to discuss. And of course, this ambiguity serves some people well, so they use words that really have no clear definition. So, for example, you'll hear me say the politicians love to say, he supports our values. So somebody promoting a candidate will say he promotes our values or she promotes our values. Well, what are our values? What is a value? You see, do we even agree on what a value is, much less what our values happen to be? And it's left undefined for a reason, because everybody can say, that candidate is one of us. When the Apostle Paul moved Christianity out of the Palestine region, out of Jerusalem, right? Remember, the early Christians lived in Jerusalem. They were Jews who knew Jesus, but St. Paul didn't. You see, St. Paul never met Jesus in the flesh. His experience of Jesus was getting knocked off the horse and blinded by the light. And in that experience, he said he experienced the risen Christ. See? And Paul took the religion of Christianity. He took it different places. Right? He's pretty much single-handedly, he is responsible for the spread. And when he went to Greece, in Greece there was a practice. They had statues of all of the known gods. And they had a statue for the unknown God, And that reminded me of, we went up to Yogaville, up in Buckingham County Courthouse, Virginia. We went up there one time, took the church board for a retreat up there. Very, very lovely people, very, very kind people. It's a little ashram up there. And they have a temple, and in the temple they had 13 altars. Well, not an altar, but a lectern, and they had a sacred text from each of these different religions open to a passage on light. the way that the little temple was set up, it looked like a lotus flower, and this area I'm talking about was at the top, and they had fiber optics cables coming down from the top. So the sunlight came in and broke into different beams of light and came down to the lectern where the scriptures of the different world religions were open to light. But then they had another lectern and it was empty. And that was for the next religion, for the as yet undiscovered religion. So Paul, when he went to Greece, he said, oh, I see you have a statue of the next God, of the unknown God. Let me tell you about him. Let me tell you about him. So we use words we use the word and we might understand the word, but we don't understand the meaning of the word. We don't have the experience to understand the meaning. There's some things that can only be known by experience. So from the Hindus, we get the idea neti neti, not this, not that. From the Buddhists, we get the idea if you see the Buddha walking along the road, kill him. And in both Christianity and in Judaism, we get the concept that says, think and believe in the heart. Think and believe in the heart. Proverbs says, as you think and believe in your heart, so you are. Right? A different kind of thinking, not a thinking of the head, a thinking of the heart. And in the New Testament, we have Jesus saying, when you pray, pray believing in your heart that it is so, and it shall be so. So all of this goes to tell us, even Carl Jung in talking about the unconscious, all of this goes to tell us that there is another way of thinking, there is another way of knowing, there is another way of being that does not involve the intellect, or does not depend primarily upon the intellect. And we want to realize that. This is what I mean by don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. What is love? Well, we can think about love forever. You know, we can write books about love. We can write plays about love. We can write poems about love. But what is love, you see? And it is one of those terms that we hear the word, we understand the word, but do we really understand love? We understand what we have experienced that we would label to be love, but that doesn't mean that everybody else's experience is even the same, you see. So do we spend our lives trying to define, trying to come up with an intellectual understanding of love, or do we just be love, you see? Do we just go be love? Do we just fall in love? Do we just love life? Do we just love each other? Do we just love all sentient beings, you see? Because love is an experience of the heart. And that's just a phrase, right? But there's a recognition that there's a different way of experience things than the intellect. And we call that of the heart. So here is the kind of the issue or where we want to go today, what we want to talk about today, just for your consideration. Excuse me, I'll get a drink of water here. In Buddhism, we are given a story, a parable, a teaching story. And it is about a person who was standing on a shore. And they looked across the waters and they saw another land. And they wanted to get from here to there. So the way that they did that was they found some wood and they found some vines and they lashed the logs together and they made some poles and they made a raft. And they pulled their raft across the water from one shore to the other. Now when they got to the other shore, they left the raft behind. It had served its purpose. You see, the parable goes on to say it would be silly to try to pick up the raft and carry the raft inland and tell everybody, hey, look at this raft. You know how we made this? Let me explain to you the process by which we made this, you know. How we had to find the logs, how we had to make an axe out of stone and chop the wood to the right length, and how we had to gather vines. And isn't this a beautiful raft, you know? And then they start their journey up a mountain on the other side, and they're carrying this raft up the mountain. And the moral of the story is you're done with the raft, you see. The raft has taken you as far as it can, and it would be silly to hold on to it. So I want you to think of the activity that we call thinking or the intellect or thought. Think of that in the same way. This is the meaning, to me, this is the meaning of the razor's edge. The razor's edge. The spiritual path is like the razor's edge. In Christianity, we're told that the road is narrow. Right? The razor's edge. We have this ability to think that we call the intellect. And we start to become aware of the fact that there's a place that exists where the intellect cannot function, where the intellect does not work. In quantum physics, you know, they talk about the Big Bang, and they talk about the singularity that existed before the Big Bang, before everything was kind of moving apart and separated and different. It was all together in one. And then the question naturally arises, well, what was it like at that singularity? And what was it like the moment before that singularity? And the answer is, we have no way of knowing. Because our way of knowing is based an intellectual basis of weighing and measuring and touching and feeling and all of these things that depend upon sensory input to come into us. And there was none of that. It did not exist. There was no time, there was no space, all those different things that they'll tell us. It just was. It just was. And that definition is not so different than the idea that we get from the scriptures about, you know, in the beginning God was. In the beginning God was. God just was. God just is. I am. So as we go down the spiritual path, we start to get exposed. Now we have to get exposed to it through ideas, but we start to realize that thinking and ideas, well, they're not going to take us all the way. So there's no sense in overthinking it. There's no sense in overthinking it. Because there comes a point in time where we must let go of thinking. We must let go of thought. In the Science of Mind textbook, Ernest Holmes says, we make experiencing God too difficult. And we make God too far away. And yet the mother has clasped him to her breast. And the gardener has seen him in the soil, you see. But there's an experience that he's talking about there. An experience perhaps of love, an experience of awe, an experience of oneness, you know. See, we don't tend to dwell too much on the magnificence of what is around us. We could take a seed, we can put it in the soil, we can water it, and we can give it some some food, and it grows and it gives us food back. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? So what we learn is that the intellect and thinking and thought is like the raft. It can take us so far, but then it can take us no further. That's the razor's edge. We're using the intellect to tell us there's something beyond the intellect. We are using the intellect to tell us it's possible to leave the intellect. But we can't take the intellect with us. it won't go there with us any more than the raft will go uphill on dry land. So we have to get out of our heads. We have to get out of our heads. The experience of God is not an intellectual experience. God is not a mathematical problem to be solved. God is the allness, the isness, and the suchness to be experienced. So we start to come to that realization, and then the question becomes, well, how in the world would we do that? How in the world would we do that? We could talk about it forever, but then we're still stuck in our heads. We're still stuck in our intellect. We're still stuck in our thoughts. And we're not experiencing it. So one word that we hear in spiritual growth, that we understand the word, but we may not understand the meaning, is to become centered. To become centered. Now the intellect tends to swing from extreme to extreme. Right? It tends to bounce all around. It tends to look at things from all sides. It weighs things. It analyzes things. It labels things. It tries to put them into pigeonholes for a while. It thinks because it put something in a pigeonhole, it understands what it is. But it doesn't. It just understands a pigeonhole. So we go from being happy to being sad. We go from being kind and loving to being angry and ready to punch somebody in the nose, you know. And all of these different swings that the intellect takes us through. And we're not centered. We're not centered. And yet we probably don't understand what centered is, what centering is. But we experience it, you see. We have all experienced it. There has all been a time where we were just immersed in our feeling. And thoughts went away, and thoughts stopped. So here are a couple techniques to practice. And my suggestion is you have to practice. You have to practice. You can watch videos about playing the piano. You can read books about playing the piano. You can get sheet music. You can get all kinds of things, but until you sit down at the piano and put your fingers on the keys, you have not experienced playing the piano. So what is it that we want? You see, Covey tells us start with the end in mind. What is it that we want? We want the experience of the divine. We want the experience of perfect love, you see. And if you look at how all religions started, they started when somebody had that experience. Moses experienced it as the I am. The bush that was on fire, the fire didn't consume. This is a metaphor for a deep meditation. In this meditation, he experienced the I amness. The Buddha experienced the suchness and the isness. Jesus experienced the Father within. Muhammad experienced the angel Gabriel. You see, if you look at all religions, they start when somebody had the experience. And you would think that the purpose of the religion is to encourage us and to help each and every one of its adherents to have the experience. But over time, what happens is in any organization, it becomes about the organization and serving the organization and keeping the organization in place. You know. In many of the histories of the early church, the Christian church that you read, they will say that, you know, healings and raising from the dead and all of these things that occurred during Jesus' time, that they occurred for some time after. But what happened is the people who were the best healers were not necessarily the church officials, and the church officials didn't want to look bad, so they discouraged the healings. I don't know exactly whether that's true or not, but it sounds plausible, you see. the organizations become about the organizations. And what I'm trying to bring us back to is, let's get out of the organization. Let's get out of our heads. Let's get out of rules and regulations. Let's get out of all of those things, and let's get into our heart, into the experience of love, into the experience of love. So one technique that we can do is to remain centered in our thinking, in our thought. Now this is not exactly what I mean by centering, but it is a step to get us in that direction. So you turn on the news and immediately they're going to give you something to outrage you. That's the way they work. That's the way they get your attention. Don't become outraged. Don't become outraged. A perfect technique for this is the perhaps. Perhaps. You remember the story about the man who had a mare. He plowed the field with his mare, and one day the mare ran away, and the people in the town went to him and said, "Oh, this is so terrible, your horse ran away, you can't plow your field." And he said, "Perhaps." And then a few days later, the mare came back and brought a group of wild stallions with her, and now the people in the town went to him and said, "Oh, aren't you lucky, your mare came back and brought all these horses. Now you have a bunch of horses, not just one. You're a very lucky man." He said, "Perhaps." And the man's son went out and tried to saddle break one of the stallions, and the stallion threw it and he broke his leg. And the townspeople went out and said, oh, it's such bad luck, your son fell off the horse and broke his leg. And the man said, "Perhaps." And then a warlord came through and conscripted all of the young men in the village and took them off to war, but left this man's son behind because he had a broken leg. And then the villagers went to the man and said, "Aren't you lucky? Aren't you lucky? The warlord took all of our sons away but left yours behind because he had a broken leg. Aren't you lucky he broke his leg?" And the man said, "Perhaps." Can you find a way to be perhaps, to be centered? If you feel yourself being sucked to one side or the other, to outrage, or I want to argue with this point, I mean, that's what they're doing. That's what's happening in the media, and it's particularly in social media. They're trying to get your emotions up so you're so you get engaged, and just remain detached. Perhaps. That's one technique. That's one intellectual technique. Physiological technique comes to us from Zen, and it's tightening the muscles of the stomach. So the idea is you inhale a belly breath. You push your belly out like a child breathes into their belly. And then as you exhale in spurts, and you tighten your stomach muscles. And then a big exhale. And inhale. Like that. And what that does is it tends to, when you squeeze your stomach in, when you tighten your gut, it tends to stop the chatter of the monkey mind. It tends to stop thought. If you think about it, if you're driving down the road and somebody pulls in front of you, or a deer jumps out in front of the car, or some other emergency comes up, you stop thinking. You don't say, "Oh, well, look, there's a deer jumped in front of the car. I wonder what kind of deer that is. Is it a doe or is it a buck? And I wonder how old it might be." No, your intellect goes, you don't need it anymore. What you need is instinct, right? So you slam on the brake and you curve the wheel and you suck your gut in, right? You're holding onto that wheel, and everything down from the chest down, you got in a tight ball. Physiologically, you can stop. You can stop. You can get that chatter to stop. And for a moment, then you can be there in that place of just being. Another physiological technique comes to us from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and it says to close all of the openings of the head, right? No, not with duct tape or super glue or anything like that, but just temporarily. So you might put plugs or cotton in your ear and put a sleep mask over your eyes, and then just pinch your nostrils and put your hand over your mouth, just slightly. You're not gonna stop. You're not gonna put yourself in any danger, but just momentarily stop all that activity. So usually what happens is all of our sensory input comes in, and it's kind of hardwired to the brain, right? All the nerves go up to the brain, and we tend to think, well, I am in the brain, my brain is me, and it's not. It's not. It's just something that we use. But if you momentarily cut that off, I think it's like the sensory deprivation tanks of the 70s. If you remember those, people would get in a tank in the dark and they would float in a very heavy saline solution of water, so it had a lot of buoyancy. And there was no sound, there was no light, there was no feeling. It was just complete sensory deprivation. See, and then at that moment, without all of the input which we're constantly reacting to, without all of that, we experience something different. So close the 7 openings of the head temporarily. And again, you don't want to obstruct your breathing passages with anything permanent. That's why they say use your fingers for your nostrils and put your hand over your mouth, and that way you'll let go when you need to breathe. And the idea is you don't want to make yourself struggle, but just for a moment, see what it's like without the normal sensory input. So these are some techniques that we can do, and now we're going to kind of get into some deeper ones, you see. In the opening treatment, I started off by saying, let's think of that area between our armpits. That's typically the heart chakra. Can we bring our awareness, right? So where our awareness is that's where our energy goes. And different traditions have a different number of chakras. So the Hindus have 7, and the Buddhists have 9, and Jewish mysticism has 10, and you can have as many as you want. It doesn't matter. The Tao has the big toe as an energy center. Where can you bring your awareness and hold your awareness, you see? And if you bring your awareness into the area between your armpits, into the heart, you see, then you start to experience things at the heart. Not stuck in our heads, but down in our hearts. So what we want to do is we want to bring your attention down into the area between your armpits. Just kind of experience it, you know. Whatever you experience, you might feel a warmth, you might feel a tingling, I don't know, maybe you feel nothing. But as you bring your attention down there, start to experience your senses coming into your heart. And so instead of coming into your head, instead of sound coming into your head, instead of smell coming into your head, imagine what it's like. Again, it's imagination. Imagine what it's like experiencing things at the level of the heart. And once we can do this, the next step is very interesting. It is to imagine yourself headless. Imagine yourself headless. Very difficult. I've tried it. It's very difficult, but it's very interesting. Can you look into a mirror and imagine that you are looking from your heart? Can you imagine that you have no head? So whatever's going on is not going on in the head, but it's going on in the heart. Can you bring your attention to the heart? Can you experience the sensory input as if it was coming into the heart? Can you get out of your head? Can you get out of your head? Now I'm tossing out several different suggestions. I mean, this tape will be up on YouTube so you can play it back, but find one or more that work for you. Find one or more that work for you. So by now, I think we're at the point where we say, okay, what I'm really trying to do here, I'm trying to get out of my head. Right? But as Wendy said in the quote she gave us, which is so perfect, right? The way to stop this hungering for thought, for the activity of our thought, the way to get out of our heads, the way to stop thinking, is to nurture ourselves with positivity and happiness, okay? To get down into our hearts. We're trying to open our hearts. We're trying to see things from the heart. We're trying to experience things from the heart level, from the area between the armpits. Now, of course, I know that, you know, our intellect's telling us, what? Are you crazy? I'm in charge around here. But we got to get out of our heads, because the divine love is not in our heads. Our intellect can only take us so far. So now we're talking about opening our hearts, opening our hearts. Can we experience from our hearts? And love is the perfect way to do that. Because all cultures tend to think that love is a matter of the heart. So why not love, you see? Why not experience the unity? What do you love? Who do you love? How do you love? Can you just surrender to that love? How wonderful it is to hug your beloved. How beautiful it is to hold a little child in your arms and just love them. If you have a pet, how much love does your dog give to you? And can you just love it back, you see? What do you love? What do you love? And can you take time and make love your spiritual practice? Out of your head, right? So love doesn't make sense intellectually. That's why we're saying we're falling in love. We're falling from our heads into our hearts. That's why people in love can speak to each other in their own little language, using cute little nicknames for each other. It defies language. It defies logic. It defies reason. It is love. And we must surrender to that, right? So we can cue up Kate Wolf and hold hands and sing "Give Yourself to Love." But she had it, you see. She had it. Give yourself to love. Another thing that we can do while we're talking about love is a practice of compassion. A practice of compassion. See, one of the things that we want to consider is the difference between happiness and joy. Right? We all wish to be happy, and surely we wish all other people true happiness, true happiness. All people, even those people who would hurt us, even those people we would consider our enemies, they desire happiness. Emma Curtis Hopkins tells us everybody assumes that there's good in the world and they should have it. I assume that there's happiness in the world and they should have it. But there's a difference between happiness and joy, and it's a very subtle difference, because some definitions of joy say that it's an experience of happiness, and it is. But it is an experience of happiness without external stimulus. Somebody gives you a present, and oh, I'm so happy, Somebody gives you a new car, oh, I'm so happy, Whatever, your favorite team, sports team wins the pennant. Oh, I'm so happy, you see. All of that is based on out there, out there, out there. And what we want to do is we want to go within, because what we're looking for is not out there, it's within here. It created us out of itself and it resides in here. We must go within. So joy is an experience of happiness that comes from within the person, without stimulus. And usually what triggers joy, one of the best triggers of joy that I know of, is giving, How can I find something within myself to give? Maybe I don't have money, maybe I don't have material goods and services, but I have something to give. I have love to give, I have a smile to give, I have service to give. I can be of service to the spirit of humanity. Find something to give. Open up your heart. This leads us to compassion, to prayer, to prayers of compassion as a means of opening up our heart. In Christianity, we have the beautiful prayer of St. Francis, and it says, O Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith, you see. Can we take that prayer and offer it from our heart? In Buddhism, we have many prayers of compassion because compassion is such a key part of their spiritual practice. Compassion is a way, a way to ignite the love in our hearts, to find that within us which wants to give. In the Catholic Church, as a small child, we were taught such a beautiful, short little prayer. It says, "Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful, and kindle within them the fire of your love." Can you find a prayer such as that? Can you find a practice such as compassion? In Buddhism, it goes even further as to imagine the people who are suffering and imagine that you are pouring your compassion out to them. Awaken the heart. Awaken the heart. Get out of your head. And the last technique that I'll discuss today is to do things that are concerned with the arts, with the senses. Music, dancing, singing, painting, all of those things. But not to do them with your head. Our culture, if you stop and think about what our culture has done to music and dancing, which should be spontaneous expressions of the soul, right? Anybody should be able to pick up an instrument and do something with it if it expresses them. But we have turned it into a system of rules and regulations and law. It was the Europeans who started musical connotation, drawing notes on a staff, so that the spontaneity of the musicians was taken away from them. They had to play exactly what was on that piece of paper. It was power and control. The conductor was in control, and the musician was going to simply play according to how it was notated, you see. It takes the spontaneity out of it. Today we have jazz, and jazz is spontaneous. There's a form, but each musician is kind of free to go in and do what they want. And then as each is doing what they want, it kind of blends together. Some of Louis Armstrong's early jazz records are still available out on the internet. It was kind of interesting to hear each musician going off in what seemed like a different direction, but then coming back together. Dance is the same way, If you look at little children when they dance, they don't know the steps, they don't know the cha-cha, they just dance. They just get into it and dance. It's like the meme that says dance like nobody's watching. So can you find time alone, turn on the music, listen to the music in your heart, and then just dance. Just express yourself. Get in the shower when you're taking a shower and sing at the top of your lungs whatever your heart wants to sing. See, we have to learn to let that be. To let that be what it is. To let that be love. Our society has taken dance and then we put rules and regulations and competitions all around us, and you go on the TV and they've got judges and they say, oh, well, this he didn't place his foot down toe first. Got to go toe first in this dance, or that dance you got to go heel first, or they didn't move their hips enough, or this or that. My goodness, get out there and wiggle. Just dance. Find a way to let that out. Find an instrument to play and just play it. Doesn't matter if you've never had a lesson in your life. Just play. Just get a keyboard and tickle the keys. Just do whatever feels good. This one I love. Get a set of finger paints. Remember those things we had when we were kids? Get a set of finger paints and some poster board. And just spread it around. Just paint. And don't be thinking about what it looks like, and don't be thinking about whether anybody else is going to like it. Just express. Just express from the heart. Don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. Sometimes people think, well, I need to take one more class, or I need to go to one more retreat, or I need to go somewhere and study with this teacher. And that may be an important part of the journey. But as Dr. Holmes tells us, as we proceed on the journey, we will arrive at the point where there's nobody left to teach us except the teacher within. within. We know that the experience of the divine is the starting point of religions, and it is the ending point, as far as we know at this time, it is the end point of our spiritual journey here. We know that that experience is what we are moving from and we are moving toward. So let's stop thinking. Let's stop doing the thing that keeps us from that. Let's stop carrying that raft of the intellect up the hill with us. And let's start experiencing. Let's start experiencing the hill. Alan Cohn, in his book, Joy is My Compass, related a story about going horseback riding in Hawaii. He lived somewhere in Hawaii. And a group of friends wanted to go horseback riding. And he said he wasn't too crazy about going horseback riding, but he wanted to be with his friends. So he went and he drove to the parking lot where they were going to meet the stable hands and the horses. And got on the horse and found out they were going to ride up the side of a volcano. There was a trail. And he said he was terrified because he was afraid of heights. He's terrified. And he said all the way up the trail, he kept thinking, well, what's going to happen if this horse stumbles? I'm going to fall. And you know, what's going to happen if something slides down the mountain from above? And all of these things in his head was just going, and it was going, and it was going. And they got up to the top. You know, there's this beautiful vista. You can imagine, you know, the scenery, the smell of the flowers in Hawaii, and looking out over the Pacific Ocean and the clouds. And he said he couldn't enjoy any of that because his heart was up in his throat and it was beating as fast as it could, and he was terrified. And the guide said, well, how was the ride up? Was it okay, or was it too steep for you? You know, and everybody said, oh, it was okay. And he said, well, it was okay. And in his heart he was saying, oh man, I was terrified. And the guy said, good, well, we're going to take the steep way down. And he said, oh my goodness. He said he just, you know, the fright just overcame him, and they started down, and the trail was in fact even steeper. And he was going down, and he was looking over the edge and realized that there was only this little bit of space between the side of the horse's hooves and the edge of the cliff, and he was starting to go into a panic attack. And he stopped himself, and he said, wait a minute. What would I be experiencing right now if I wasn't afraid? If he wasn't stuck in his head and thinking of all the things that could go wrong, right? Analyzing, weighing, judging all of the actions of the intellect. What would I be experiencing right now if I wasn't afraid? And he said, well, if he wasn't afraid, he would be experiencing beauty. He would be experiencing serenity. He would be experiencing companionship. I can't remember everything that he said. I'm paraphrasing the story. Get out of your head. Get out of your head. Stop weighing. Stop analyzing. Stop judging. Stop thinking that I need to learn just one more thing. And practice. Practice love. Practice compassion. Practice opening your heart. Practice stilling your intellect, stilling your mind. Close off the openings of the head. Tighten your gut, breathing out. Listen with your heart. Experience the 5 senses coming in to your heart. Imagine yourself headless. Love like no one was watching. Dance like no one was watching. Sing like no one is listening. Play an instrument. Paint. Draw. Get your head out of the picture. Because you are divine love. Love is the experience of oneness. When we experience love, we are experiencing God. That's what we want. Not the idea of God, not the idea that I love God, not the idea that God loves me, but the experience of God's love, which we experience in loving each other. And so it is.